First of all, are there anything that the speakers would like to ask of one another? Shall we start from the discussion within the panel, or across the panel, or any kind of comments or thoughts or feelings that you had about one another's presentations?
I'd like to ask Kyle a bit more about those 5D and how did you start with that? So we were talking
True
about
story?
that.
True story?
Did it come from an illustration? Or?
No, it's actually quite a funny story. So there's two parts to it. So I was in a class where I was covering for someone in a class, a sophomore sort of technical drawing class, and one of the students was having a really hard time figuring out how to do that horrible arm folded thing in the flats that I really hate. So I literally cut out some paper and just folded it, and they went, oh, okay. And then that night I went out for a drink, and I was sat at a bar, and I was always doodling on napkins. And one of the barmen said, oh, she's cute, I'd like to see her walk in here like that. And I went, okay. And the same day I went, literally, the paper folder thing happened, and then that happened. And I went back to my office and just made a doll, and took it back. And it's still hanging in the same bar now, in a glass case. So it was just moment, again, I was at Donna Karen's place, and she was speaking once, and she said something that, again, really resonated with me about she didn't talk about fashion. She just talked about being open to hearing things come to you. And I think that's really difficult sometimes because we don't hear, we don't see. But that day was very much about just these moments that sort of clicked and just became that. Yeah.
Like a ribbon.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your talk, by the way.
Thank you.
It's so personal, and I think lots of students and staff are often scared of involving their own sort of feelings. You talked a lot about intuition.
Yeah.
In the first section, I really enjoyed this new word, well.
At the bottom.
The red.
And Victoria, we realise that there's the linking word, the biophilia, intuition word. But I was wondering whether all your sad moments, and especially the loss of your dad, that moments like that, big things in your life, big personal things, make you more intuitive, and maybe make you see, like you said, have those other spaces.
I think so. I mean, I don't even consider myself a fashion educator anymore. I'm more of a therapist, I think. You know, it's like you're in a room with people and you're helping them through life. It's like, I can't remember the last time I taught someone how to draw a piece of fashion. I mean, I don't even care, quite honestly. I think it's more about helping people find themselves. And to me, that's what fashion is. It's about being a little bit angry, a little bit pissed off, a little bit sad, a little bit happy, and channeling that into something that is our output is clothing. It's almost like a byproduct, which is clothes. But if you don't embody that emotion in your work, it's just clothing. But if you get all that emotion in there, then it becomes fashion. And for me, that's where people like McQueen, who was such a genius, because it was guttural. You know, it was just so powerful. Because it was emotional, and if it's not, you shouldn't be doing it. You know, it's. I think that it has to be, right? I mean, I think so. I hope so. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I feel like I'm a passionate teacher, but learning just happens when the blocks are taken out of the way. And when I'm working with individuals, I'm quite often just sensing, well, where's the pain? Where's the difficulty? What is it that's stopping someone from really fully engaging with their thinking, with their sensing, with their projecting? And it's quite often an unconscious or in between the lines process of support at those places of transition or connection that may be a bit blocked, that as soon as a certain connection is made, it feels to me like the learning just happens of its own accord. And so I don't have to help people learn at all. Their learning just takes place almost spontaneously once those links are made.
I have a good story, actually. There was a student of mine who suffered with eating disorder, and she was like, I can't find an inspiration, I can't find an inspiration. I was like, well, what's happened to you in your life, la, la, la. And she told me this story, and I was like, well, use that. I said, use that. And she went home and she did a photo shoot of all the bits of her body she didn't like. Shoulder blades, neck bones, whatever it is, clavicles. And anyway, her work designed itself because she was so in the work. Anyway, graduation happens, and her father, this man from Texas, who was like 7 foot, he was huge, comes up to me, puts his arms around me, and bursts into tears, going, he spent thousands and thousands of dollars in trying to help his daughter deal with what was wrong with, her disorder, and now she's like challenging, and he's crying, and I was there going, my God, this is amazing that you can actually get people to fix themselves through their work, and I think, like you said, the work just did itself then, it's like, and I think if you can get that emotion in there, then the designing is the easy bit, it's just getting yourself to connect to the work, I think, is the hard bit.
I think I've been lucky being here in that I'm having the space and time to create the works, but very intuitively and very emotionally. So anything that's happening, personal, whatever, usually goes in the work somewhere. So you don't always realise it at the time, maybe when you're looking back or something, if there's something that's happened in your life, I mean, even in the concept or something, it's very relevant to what my thinking and what I'm doing at that time. And I think that is part of a kind of artistic or creative practice, but it's also, like you say, some sort of a therapy maybe as well. But it leads to these kind of emotion-led or this emotional, kind of very open way of thinking and feeling.
I think the problem is, there's a lot of work being done around mental health in fashion, and the relationships people have with their work, and the amount that we have to produce or are encouraged to produce multiple, like 6 collections per year or something crazy like that, which is why things happen to people, and there's a really beautiful TED talk by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and she talks about the fact that she doesn't want to see all the people that she loves as brilliant geniuses kill themselves anymore, because they just like this kind of inner. So you have to be emotionally connected to your work, but you can't let it be so emotional that it's something that kills you. It's just like, where do you find that balance between the two? It's not easy to be. It's like, I think creativity is such a gift, but it's also such a curse at the same time.
I think that's why a lot of us, as part of our method, do reflect. And unless you actually systematically write down those reflections and you can learn from your reflections, it's really hard to actually move your work forward. And that's what personally I found with my work. Once I started to put those systems in place, I can make sense of all those reflections.
Agreed.
I think the cultures of research and also fashion might in their own ways tend to idealise ideas of perfection and loveliness, and so they're kind of already linked in to certain ideas of either knowing more or being more beautiful or making other people feel more beautiful. So as practitioners of fashion and of research, to be able to allow oneself the space of the vulnerability of not knowing or not feeling perfect or clever or even capable, and to actually experience what that feels like to be in a place of not yet knowing, which is actually much more difficult than it sounds. It sounds as if we just spend our time sitting around being useless, at ratepayers' expense. But that, as being able to reach through to an experience that actually is universal and allows people, as Flora says, to be intuitive to others' sense of loss or difficulty, is an incredibly creative space, a space where there is not yet anything, but where there is potentially something new. But it's a very difficult emotional process, and there's no PhD books that say how to get a PhD that says you're going to have to spend some time doing, this nothingness or this feeling useless or not yet knowing or being in a vulnerable place. So whether or not one can actually write it up as a research injunction get to that difficult place and stay there for a bit and see how it feels and write about it. Without it turning into narratives of the suffering artist, which we sort of know about, don't we? We know that as a romantic myth, that somehow suffering is inherently good or a redemption. And it's not quite that you're describing. You're describing something that's a much more active form of difficulty and frustration and requiring strength and resilience and some form of action. It's not only a kind of passive acceptance of complete suffering.
Yeah.
I love this idea that... Oh, sorry, do you want to ask the question? I was just going to say, I love this idea that I was listening to a talk on creativity by Guy Claxton, and he talks a lot about embodied methods of thinking, which is what kind of we're talking about. And he uses this phrase from David Bohm, which is, if we think of ourselves as individuals, we sort of cut ourselves off from our thinking environment. We think through our bodies because our bodies are in the world. Our bodies are the environment. And you can't take the self, he says, you can't take a whirlpool out of water, reminded by your water images. You can't take a whirlpool out of the water. And Guy Claxton ends up saying, well, he feels like he's just part of a wave. A sense of being a part of this rhythm that fashion perhaps is living you, lives us. But it's all, yes, but it also reminds me that institutions, devour us. And listening to a monk who was leaving the monastery to go and live in New York, he said, well, this place is like a dragon's lair. You have to go in, get the jewels, and get out before the dragon eats you up. And then he was in New York with his apartment and put a sign over the door on the inside. Just before he walked out into the street, he would see meditation hall. So he kind of turned it around, left the institution, and found a way to survive that experience.
That's smart.
Chantal.
Thank you. I've enjoyed all of your talks. Thank you. They're very varied. And I just would like to talk about something that I'm working on for my own, so I'm recording the answers. I'm researching creative thinking, and in particular how our digital world, we're talking about burnout a minute ago, but our digital world is affecting creativity. And we keep looking at things like attention economy and our overkill of information overload. And you just talked a little bit about not being able, or the importance to reflect. I just would like your viewpoints from your experience on how you think technology is affecting creativity.
Great question.
Thank you.
It depends how it depends how you use it as the individual. I mean, I one of the things I try and encourage the students to use is, rather than in terms, the internet's the internet in terms of research. It's like we're all guilty of being extremely lazy and not going to the library like we used to, but because it's so fast and it's so instant, and you can do it in your bedroom, in your underwear, and it's like. But I think for me, technology has become such in terms of it's a tool to present things, findings. You make something look nice through technologies, and then you show it to the world. What I try to get my students to do is to use technology as a design tool, as opposed to a presentation tool. So getting them to look at technologies that might not typically be used in the space that they designed for. So, architectural building, like SketchUp, or tools that are typically used in some other space, taking that into a fashion space and using it as a way to design rather than simply present. And that seems to work really well for them, especially, I was talking to someone in Milan recently about the fact that we used to be knocking on the library door waiting for Collezione to be delivered, because it was like, when is that magazine coming? And it was like 4 months after the shows, or 5 months after the shows, and then you would pour through these books, and now it's like, That's terrifying and really sad to me, and that's why the pace is getting faster and faster and faster, because and then the designing becomes a sort of copy of itself, And then you see Balenciaga, it's like, is that Balenciaga or is it Vetements or is it, who is that? It's like, because they all become sort of hybrids of each other. So, I mean, the way I've designed my program is very much about using technology as a tool to develop sort of design thinking as opposed to just presentation. So, you know, getting them to do an exclusively research online project and then getting them to do a completely non-research, you know, where they can't use computers, and I know lots of people do this. But I think the pace is, you know, they all overlap. I think the pace is the problem because technology is getting faster and faster and faster. So, I mean, you have to embrace it. You have got no choice, right? I don't know if you remember the Landor Corporation thing up there I just did, but that was a conversation about, there was one woman that asked a question. She goes, I see in the future there will be no libraries. And I was like, you're daft. And I was like, you know, and she was from Second Life, so she designed these avatars. And I said, we need to fix our own lives before we start designing our own online lives. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're at this massive junction of, you know, we have to embrace it and we have to use it, but we have to use it well and don't just become dependent on it. Because if those satellites fall, we need to be able to how to read a book and, you know, it's fact. You know, I think we can become too dependent on it.
Is there anybody who uses digital technologies and has some kind of experience or thinking about the ways in which it either accelerates our relationship to creativity or the way it impinges on creativity? We'd like to hear from you. And also maybe thoughts from Amy, whose work is very much in, the creativity really uses digital technologies of all
Digital
kinds.
and physical.
Yeah.
I have a very
Yeah.
much of a love-hate relationship with technology.
Mm-hmm.
I hate mobile phones. I hate the idea of being disturbed by mobile phones because when we're in our flow of creativity, it's very disruptive, and I don't like it. I have so many papers at my fingertips because the best research I did is when I took a novel out with a pencil and I went away for 2 days and just read that book thoroughly. But I love designing with it, and I love the hands-on development of working with these technologies, and I think this is why creatives need to control the way that digital and physical information will be represented. We can't let the engineers decide for us. So that's why.
I also have to think about what the word technology means. I mean, once upon a time, a chicken bone with a hole through it was technology to, you know, to whip stitch a piece of leather. So it's like, one of the courses on my program is called Craftology, and it's actually about that exact thing. It's like, where does craft and technology intersect? And, you know, just looking through the lens of time, you know, in 100 years from now, will we be looking at 3D printing as craft? Because it's no longer technology, because it's evolved so much. So I think, you know, technology is, you know, it's a flint.
Yeah.
It's a technology.
And dye
So-
processes as well.
Exactly.
Turning it on off. They don't need it.
Yeah, but
They
those
suddenly
things,
realise they don't need it.
those things would be a new technology to them, right? Because it's not technology that they
No,
know. It's the other
it's
way
gone back
around.
to my roots.
Yeah.
You know.
Eve, you use a lot of digital technology for developing an international teaching platform for global innovation design and fashion innovation. And you encourage students to be able to develop a digital portfolio and so on. So for you, enabling people to use the technology is obviously a crucial part of their fashion education. What's your feelings about it?
There's a bit of irony here because I encourage all my students use technology. One of the things is for the online learning, because you work with students that are from different continents, and so you basically the whole learning is pending on Wi-Fi, how strong the signal is, and how you correspond with them. And so whenever they say if the Skype it's not working, FaceTime, that's Google Hangout. We need to build that conversation in either audio or video. And one other thing is building this online learning platform. Also use the different, like people re-verify the cloud, the drive. The students has to upload all their work. So it's an interaction of them to work between the physical and digital work all together, and then edit it and then put it onto the folder. Yeah, and then how they're going to present it. So there's a very sort of crucial point, and then especially one of, for example, one of the students recently registered to the fashion portfolio course. He's from South Africa, and there's very limited resources. And when I talk to him about just go online, to go to Pinterest and do this, do the theme that you want to create. And he didn't know that he could. He thought I was going to, say, you have to go to the library. And I was like, no, just go to Pinterest, let's use a board, because we need the fastest way to start to communicate. And he's like 17 years old, he's very, very young, and he's just like taking a lot of the information in. But when I said to him, I said the limit, there's I want 50 images, but it has to be edited 50 images. There are, unlimited images you can find about one of the particular theme he's interested in, but there's also right or related images he has to put in that Pinterest board. So it's very interesting just to see how he selected the image, how he finalized the image, how he put on that, and that's becoming him as well. So there's a dialogue of how the teaching and learning sort of interact. Yeah.
I think, just on the Pinterest thing, I was teaching a draping class, and I sent a list with the syllabus of things to bring to class, and calico, pins. This girl came with her phone. She goes, "Oh, I thought you meant Pinterest." I'm like, "How are you going to drape with Pinterest?" That's the extreme problem, though, right? They don't even know that you need pins to drape. Like in a draping class, they bring Pinterest. True story.
Victoria, what are your thoughts about the technologies and in your work, the laboratory, and because obviously some of the scientists work very much with very specific technologies.
Well, I guess mine is two-stranded, maybe, in that I am very guilty of using Pinterest, which I love and have been told off by, for using. But as a fast, quick way to get lots of imagery, if you have a fast project, a quick turnaround, something you can share easily with people that you're collaborating with, something that it looks beautiful, it's very quick, it's very easy to do. Things like Twitter, I think, are super useful as well for more outreach and promotional purposes of what you're doing, but I think I make use of that rather than Facebook, but these guys might, I don't know, use other forms of technology in those ways. And as a design tool, so CAD, so Illustrator, Adobe Suite, Illustrator. In terms of, and I know it is both to design, but mine is sometimes as representation and visualization in order to kind of sell what I'm doing, package it up to ensure it's kind of a professional way of presenting yourself within a collaboration. If I'm going to go to the scientist with all my scrappy bits of drawing and sketching and stuff, it's far more professional to take something that has been worked up into a proper design.
You said.
Maybe.
I think this is where we are in a position where we can make those changes. It's like I'm all about digital, so I spent hours and hours making that presentation as slick as I possibly could because it's a professional way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you saw my physical portfolio, it's a car crash.
Yeah.
And when people tried to force me to put that into a formal space, I'm like, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you have to be one or the other. I think it's ways of delivering different types of information to different types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And some things work for some people, I don't think it has to be one or the other.
It's true, but I think just when you're starting off and it's a new collaboration and you're almost trying to convince the scientists that you are legitimate and that what I'm doing is a professional and good, and this is what will turn out like this, is what the outcome is almost, then I find it useful for that instance in trying to kind of not manipulate, but to kind of persuade,
and as many times as designers we have to persuade.
Yeah, it's a key, I think, too, especially collaboration.
But then again, in fashion, where it's such a tactile thing anyway, it's like to have. I hate portfolios that are plastic sleeves. It's like you can't even get to the fabrication. It's like I want to touch this thing. I want to, and that's what I think. Again, it's a different thing what you're delivering.
But I think you're right as well, because I think it will start like that in order to win them over. And what the outcome is completely different,
Yeah.
and you know, depending on how
So
good
what
the
we're saying
material,
is we
whatever.
need both.
Yeah, yeah, true.
We need
It's-
both.
And in our
we
research
need both.
process, we don't only collect images. I know from the textile side of things, we often collect bits and feelings and, you know, I don't know, barks of wood.
Well,
all
that's what I
sorts
call
of
the
things,
5D
yeah.
sketchbook. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, we collect sounds, we collect
Mm.
image, movie files. You know, a sketchbook is a student sketchbook is no longer a book. Even though I just went to the Royal College Art Bookshop and bought about $100 worth of sketchbooks, purely because I had to have them.
Money
But
well spent, money well spent.
I've got another 17 years worth of sketchbooks there.
Good.
But you know, I love that.
Mm.
But at the same time, you do have all these digital files. But how do you put those together in a way that helps people understand? You know, it's like how do you build this 5D space of research?
Need new interfaces.
Yeah, we need something else that's, you know,
Material
smells and, you know, especially in this sort of
Yeah, feel it.
the synesthetic world we live in. It's like, you know, how do you put that volume of stuff out there in a synthesized way, in a way that's coherent for other people to understand what you're interpreting it as? Because, you know, it's your ideas that you're trying to get people on board with.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
that's
but
true.
you know, it's not just that anymore, and it's not that. It's all of this stuff. It's
There might well be something to do with the three-dimensional logic of gaming. The fact that
Yeah.
gaming is not nearly as kind of literary or syntactic
Yeah.
as written language. So gamification involves algorithms about decisions that lead to other kinds of decisions, which is much more like the creative process of, say, creative pattern cutting or experimental draping. So it may well be that gamification, which is sort of 3D in time, 4D technologies of digital representation,
yeah.
might well prove to be some kind of notational sketchbook that maybe in the future more accurately represents the thinking,
Yeah.
creative process of the maker. And that would extend your concept of play from being the kind of more 20th century concept of play to what young people now, how they're playing, which is through games. And I think that that's a new technology that is universal and popular and accessible and intuitive, that has very close relationships to fashion thinking and the kind of creativity that is there in fashion sort of styling, reciprocity.
I always compare it to those books when I was young, where we would have these books where if you want so-and-so to go up the mountain, turn
Yes.
to pages, la la la.
Yeah.
And then you would end up, the
Yeah.
same book could finish in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a 5D sketchbook looks to me. It's like, so the person viewing your work has a choice on where they want to go and see next and how they see it and how they respond to it.
It's algorithmic
Yeah.
thinking, isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, the other way that fashion is very often used in terms of the new digital technologies is that it enables, fashion culture enables ideas that seem very remote and distant and inaccessible and belonging to another culture altogether, like science or technology, to become very immediate and proximate and personalised. So fashion, when fashion incorporates new technologies in some way, not only for display, but actually incorporates them in a game in some form, then it's a very, very useful function in making things that are remote become familiar or setting up a new relationship.
I have one sort of, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I run fashion PhD in fashion. Fashion textile PhD student and working 3D printed textile and in fashion, and I happen to be from Taiwan. So my experience is more like ambiguity between those conflicting things. And when I was studying my university and actively around these kind of issues, so but what I was doing fashion development is very tactile and very valueless. Yeah, and
Sensory.
yeah, exactly. And I really like the feeling of the material. So when I came here and started to learn more about technology, and I just couldn't let it go, because one thing is very convenient, as they mentioned, and the other thing is somehow technology can create the things that we can never imagine before. For example, I did like algorithm-based 3D-dimensional growing geometry based on body and body movement. You can never imagine that until you experience it and you create what you stand. And but on the other side, like beautiful and rich thing is to combine the other different things together. And I don't really see whether it's matter it is technology or not, but the newness or the creativity or the thing that we never imagined is new. That's my thought. And I think technology.
But imagine giving someone a piece of charcoal that has never used a piece of charcoal before, and they've only ever used a computer. I mean, that must be like mind exploding as well, right? So it's like, even though you can't imagine those things because the machine does it for you, getting a crochet needle and doing something that you've never done before is like, that's going to blow your brain as well, right? And then how you put the two together, it's
It's more like a way of thinking.
yeah.
We've had also students who've come to us from Tsinghua University and others. There are others from China to do research here, and when we point out that the access to machines at the Royal College is sort of limited, there's a range of machines, and some of them are traditional, some of them are new. The students point out that in Tsinghua they have infinite access to very, very sophisticated machines, and machines are not for them the source of particular interest or problems. What they feel they really want from education is concepts and an ability to understand what it is that the machines offer and to work, what working with the machines will generate
Well, they come through a very prescribed system generally.
Right.
When they go to Tsinghua, which is sort of, supposedly the best in the country, they're the equivalent of here. I mean, I find certain flaws throughout, and I've been going for 12 years. It's getting better. But there are, once they start their program, certainly zero, I have in year zero, but I also have masters and I also have visiting students from other institutions. Once you break into their thought processes, yes, they can look at machines, but they can also look at tactile elements. My bag is the tactile elements. I mean, I'm not anti-technology, but I don't get it. I get what you're saying, and that's great, but fortunately you don't know. But I find that they come through that very technology-based, and they're frightened when you just give them the fabric, the scissors, and the pin and the mannequin. But they're so quickly it opens up, and that's what I personally enjoy, and I like to see. And their outcomes after a month. They then carry on into all their various options and areas. Some use technology, some carry on actually being quite creative. The more, as I call, fine art element. They may not end up in the commercial industry, but the majority end up in the commercial industry, where technology is vitally important.
I'm just thinking that the British Art School system is also one in which the student not only has access to a whole range of materials and processes, but is also likely to meet, say, Salman Rushdie discussing the Satanic Verses, and there's the sense in which the practitioner is not seen as somebody that is separate from other cultural practices, whether that's music, sound seminars, or, the ideas of new architecture or new developments in other disciplines. And I was wondering whether or not people's own experience here is there any comments that you could make about any moments that have either been valuable or obstructive in terms of encounters with disciplines that are quite other than your own? Is that something that is useful or?
I just came back from Primavera Festival in Barcelona, and I went there to see the
Aphex Twin was my music for my show here.
What's that?
Aphex Twin was music for my show here, yeah.
Just incredible, and for me, Aphex Twin is probably one of the most important musicians of the time. I would put him on a parallel, let's say, along with Beethoven or whatever. He's a genius, but everything that he does is completely digital, like he is. And then you think about, okay, well, maybe some people wouldn't say that because it is entirely digital, but there is that level ground, it's different nowadays. So, incredible stuff. It has to be this music. You guys won't know him. It's just incredible.
His videos are terrifying, aren't they?
Yeah, I
His
know.
videos are horrible, like really scary.
So music, and again, that's the relationship between music and the creative process and fashion is something that has evolved. They've co-evolved, haven't they, quite closely since the 19th century. Are there any other cultures that, as designers, you've encountered that have been inspirational in that same way of feeling that you've met a fellow traveller, or that the culture is inspirational?
I don't know, I think for me, I think it's all embodied in our studio upstairs. And we kind of, because it's this weird space that's kind of separate but not, because the doors are open a lot of times. But I mean, for me, it's like I'm sitting in front of Victoria and she's got these jars of like her material, and it smells and kind of invades.
You
your
put up with a
space.
lot, do you? You put up with a lot.
Far has set up this really giant loom, and he's weaving in the corner, and then there's so many things happening at the same time, and that's
Side
really,
pleating and things.
eye-opening in a way, because I've been used to be in a fashion studio that was very much a fashion studio where there's fabric and pins, unfortunately, all over the floor, but not on my shelves. So just this kind of direct confrontation with those things that are so other and that I just don't understand, that are equally, they're just fascinating, even though I don't get it and I don't know, and I'm kind of a little bit jars because I feel like they're going to crawl out and take over at one point. But I think that's kind of the embodiment of what that I don't know, it's kind of that meeting place where everything is just kind of allowed to happen and coexist. And it might, I don't know, I think it might influence you in some ways even though you're not aware of it. It's kind of, it's such, like, it's a very natural process of widening the horizon without doing anything but being in the space.
Yeah, because we were yesterday at this LDOC, sorry if I sidetracked, but we were at the LDOC conference yesterday speaking to some people like Miriam or other experiences of PhD researchers, practice-led PhD researchers without a space or without a studio. And we were saying how lucky we are as well, because we're a community, all of us, who are all sitting next to each other as well. But you know, we are quite a tight research community as well, which I think has been really important for support and kind of providing mainly support, but you know, tea and talks and everything. I think it's been a really interesting as well, our seminars on Thursdays, but there are so many opportunities here as well for those of you who are starting to go and just sit in other, I don't know if you're allowed to actually,
Yes,
but
you are.
I
Other
did.
schools.
So go and sit in other schools. So like in first year I went across all the schools, so IDE, IED, fashion, research, just because mine is quite interdisciplinary, and there's a lot of ideas that are to do with mine that are being discussed across different disciplines anyway, but I think, and the sound seminars, but so many things that everything, especially in first year, you're trying to soak it all up and trying to absorb everything and get involved in all of those different spaces and places and be inspired and be hearing those ideas, and it's so exciting to be here. And but I do think that's really important for first year. If we're still up to that. Yeah.
I think that, I mean, for people designing courses, and I don't know how you feel about this, Carl, because you're in the process of setting up a whole research culture at FIT, but there are decisions to be made about whether or not the leader of the art school or the discipline selects a range of students, all of whom share a commonality of project and process or materials, or whether or not one chooses a very distinctly different series of practitioners on the understanding that somebody who's a hand weaver may well inspire out of sheer difference somebody who is a techno-textiles practitioner of, you know, and I think the Royal College has traditionally maintained this policy of maximum difference, and that means that all the researchers develop a kind of patience and humility and tolerance, an appreciation of difference, and it's to do with cultural differences and to do with perhaps, you know, all sorts of national differences, but very much to do with practitioners' differences and being able to understand and negotiate almost opposites in technical practice.
One of the first things I'm doing with my students, so there's going to be 18 students starting in August, I interviewed about 77 students altogether, and we picked 18. And they're all very, very different. But what I'm going to do with them for the first 2 weeks is to play the game of exquisite corpse with their research. So a children's wear designer that's researching into colour theory will take the architectural person's work and then go away and do some work and then represent their work to them, so that they get all these different perspectives. So over the course of 2 weeks, they will have all swapped research about 4 to 5 times and then represented it to each other. And then at the end of it, they have to represent their translations of other people's translations of their translations back to the room. But I'm quite excited about that.
Do people know the surrealist game of the exquisite corpse?
You draw a head and you fold a piece of paper down, then you draw a body.
Pass it on. And yes, sorry, Lucy.
I've been waiting to kind of make a comment for a little while now.
Oh,
Just want to say thank you to everybody. It's been a really interesting afternoon. But I want to return, if I might, to the title of the symposium, which is Rite of Passage. I think I've got a big enough voice, don't you? Rite of Passage, and this passage creates this kind of feeling in my head of a tunnel. And it reminds me of a very seminal paper that, or a speaker that I heard in Singapore about 3 years ago. His name is Ray Land. I think he's now at Durham, used to be at Edinburgh. And he talked about troublesome knowledge and threshold concepts. And this paper is very, very interesting, especially to those of us who are teachers or teach teachers. I'm sure, Tim, you know about this paper. And how that paper and its ideas has linked everybody's talk this afternoon, because what you've been talking about is these threshold concepts, this arch, if you like, that you found troublesome and that you actually went through, particularly you are very, very interesting. And also the point that, Tim, you made, and I think at the beginning you talked about liminal space. And that liminal space is where we find ourselves, where we're not quite sure which step to take, which way to go, should it be this, should it be that, and that is the block, that's what kind of stops us from progressing. And I think those of us who reflect and analyse those things and eventually make some kind of stride forward is it's a very positive thing to be able to do. But I think too it's quite luxurious to be able to have that time, that period of self-reflection. And I know Carl and I talked a little bit this week about his preparation for this presentation, and that to a certain extent was a kind of rite of passage.
Absolutely.
That you've been through that threshold concept. But can I recommend that if you haven't read threshold concepts and troublesome knowledge, there's a lot of work around that and liminality, but I hope you'll enjoy it.
Oh, will you? Oh, thank you.
Within our
Yeah, research group.
but I think anyone else kind of
Yeah.
wants in on there.
So we have a research in crisis day every Thursday, and everybody's welcome to come and have tea and read and cry, rage, think, debate, discuss.
I think we've got one last question up
One
here.
last
Let's go
question.
for it.
Go back to the beginning, and it links also to what you were just talking about, because I really enjoyed listening. It was quite bizarre, your chair moment at the beginning, and what is going on. When you did the microphone thing, I'm particularly interested in sound and music and learning and philosophy. That's my research. I was at really early stages, and I'm not ever going to do it. Don't let me.
Yes, you will.
I'm writing it. It's going to be a book, maybe. But when you held the microphone to your heart, looking for your heartbeat, I think that's the answer, isn't it? It's all inside. It's actually allowing yourself to go to those terrifying places. It's okay. All the terrified students I've had this year that have said particularly worrisome set of personal issues, they've all got so many problems. None of them know that they've all got the same problems. Only I know that they've all got virtually the same problem at some point within the 2 years, and nearly didn't make it. So
think it's also, we should be really lucky that we have these problems. You know, I think we should be very grateful that we are, you know, creatives and we do have these problems. And
You talk about that's a shame as well. You talk
yeah,
about,
yeah, yeah.
All of you seem to have this dyslexia thing. I probably have, I haven't found out. But when you said about the reading, and also you talked about, I was just like, that is me, that's me. So that's quite worrying. Or not. But that sort of shame of like, oh, I'm not good, I can't do it, I'm not the same as whatever else is doing. Makes us here.
Absolutely,
That's
yeah.
what I believe.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why the discussion space, which Eve generously has created through the Research Life Symposia, in a sense it is a luxury, but it is an absolutely necessary luxury. It's not something that we can do without. And it's a paradox that some luxuries are not, they're not something that we can choose to ignore or neglect or do away with. They are absolutely fundamentally necessary. And things like talking and thinking together and making together and sharing experiences are fundamentally necessary to the luxurious practice of making new cultures and being creative.
Really enjoyed that liminal word is just the best word ever.
And thresholds,
And
threshold
just
concepts.
invisible energies that are
Good.
going around the room. You just, you know, the person next door to you in the studio could be subliminally giving you the right information. But you don't know. You're in the door, out the door, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you see the invisible, I don't know.
Is that
Well, in the
lovely- Sorry, I was just going to say there's a lovely concept of, well, that phenomena of entrainment, where you put two objects together and they sort of start. I think the most visually striking example is pendulums. And they end up swinging together in the same rhythm, just because they're next to each other as separate objects. And that, for me, is the ability, whether we're using technology or not, it's the ability to slow down, to be as slow as possible, and to work as quickly as possible. Because I think without a familiarity with those different rhythms.
Without using rhythms, really down to the rhythms from
Yeah.
rhythms from maths.
Yeah.
I was always terrified of maths, but now I realise maths is everything. And so it's just quite relaxing.
Yeah.
Maths is music, is sound, is
Yeah.
colour, is form, is everything.
And I think the body I remind myself the body's a technology that I'm still learning to use. You know, and
Love your muscle and the skeleton you've got.
and if we can, by learning to pay attention, for instance, is a skill, and that is enabled by craft or technology. That ability to stay in constant contact with something. I also teach meditation, but that ability to stay in constant contact with an experience for a certain length of time makes us realise how we still haven't got quite the hang of this technology here of paying attention. How interesting.
It's a really interesting talk, but there's a surgeon who works in Imperial, Roger Kneebone, is working with a lace maker, Oaks, and she was talking about the tension of the stitches, you know, when you're stitching things, she can almost do it without looking, because it's so tiny anyway. Just have a little glance and you're really feeling things. Trying to explain that to a surgeon to be able to stitch parts of the body better. I was like, really still stitching? But apparently they do, and they like to leave holes as well for gases. But you say trying to, you couldn't learn that just by reading a book. You have to have a go at it.
It is a tacit.
So say, you know, when you do that, you don't learn from lace making, that's a new conversation, but you just learn by watching and doing it and talking to the other guys and you let's get too tired now. The next time we're it's more feeling and intuitive.
So there's a kind of tacit knowledge. And Roger Kneebone is somebody who has developed through the Crafts Council something called parallel practices, where the Crafts Council will subsidise practitioners in art, design, textiles, fashion, to work alongside other practitioners. So the first experiment he did was to get young medical trainees who are working in the anatomy labs and they're dissecting corpses. So they're 20 and they're dissecting other people's grandparents, and it's a kind of big experience, you know, it's not unlike a kind of threshold moment. And their medical training does not really give them the space to discuss or think about what this might mean to them on a visceral level. They're learning the anatomy of the bone and the muscle.
When he learned, they were working with his cadavers, that all the colours
Yeah.
were just grey and muted, sort of greyish. But now they're working, you can see the colour inside people's bodies. They're working with fresh ones.
There's that. What the Crafts Council does is it allows artists, or in this case, Amy Holroyd-Twigg, who went in and simply, or Celia Pym, she went in and mended. Her practice is to mend things, is repair, so darning and repairing knitwork. And she just went in and she was sitting in the corner of the anatomy lab and she was mending her things as she does, that's her practice. And the others were learning anatomy, and they simply coexisted, a bit like the pendulum you were describing, two things being in the same space, but not necessarily forcing to be related. And then over the year, it was a matter of tracing what effect each had on the other. And it's a very interesting experiment. And it's such a success that it's being repeated now with a number of different practitioners in different institutions.
Are you quite concerned that because there's much less art and design in schools, and lots of young children don't ever get that, and sewing thing that you used to like nail stitches about 8 or trying to shoelaces, that they don't do that. So yeah, the idea of charcoal being given to somebody.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly how I arrived at where I arrived, was watching my mum. She would do hems on wedding dresses and stuff, and my father would draw oil rigs. He worked as an engineer on the oil rigs, and I would be watching my grandmother knit, and I'd be watching my mother fix these hems on skirts, and I'd be seeing my father's technical drawings, and I would be like, sitting there with my legs in casters and just collecting this information and going, I'm going to put that together somehow. And I broke so many sewing machines on my mum's by trying to sew trash bags and stuff, you know. So it's about collecting that, and you know, you're a product of your environment. So whatever you're seeing, and you know, you put it all together in your way. It's how you become what you become, I think.
Well, on those wise words, Eve would like to invite you to come for a glass of wine. Is it in the art bar?
Was it our studio?
4 o'clock. Is it in?
I think
In our
Our
studio.
studio,
In our
unfortunately,
studio.
yes.
You're very welcome to, in traditional art school fashion,
Otherwise not.
kind of end the debate, discussion, symposium party with a drink and a chance to talk and exchange. So
And
thank you
thank you,
very
Claire.
much, and
Thank
thank you, Eve.
And thank you.